Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for January 3rd, 2024. As we begin the new year, I want to give our Western audience a view of how the global majority is looking at the policy being made in Washington, in London, and in Brussels. We have two full-scale wars underway, many civil wars, many situations of hunger and suffering due to sanctions, due to Western imperial policy. And we have the battle defined as that between so-called democracies and so-called authoritarian states. But you don't know the whole picture because of the censorship which is being conducted on behalf of the City of London, Wall Street, military financial complex, which is intended to maintain the control of the Unipolar Order over the billions of people in the world. Now, due to the censorship, you don't know the whole picture, but I want to give you a view of some spokesmen who are addressing this. Let me start with one, a very prominent figure, and I'll tell you who it is in a moment. As his commentary for the New Year address, he said, "This year began with one fierce military confrontation of global significance and ends with two. There's no guarantee that they will not continue until the end of 2024. The chain of conflicts, seemingly territorial, but essentially existential, may prove to be quite long." He goes on to say, "In almost all G7 countries, the ratings of ruling parties and coalitions are now extremely low. That is, governments represent the interests of a smaller part of the population. Alternative forces that challenge the current government are labeled as populist. This term, which comes from the word people, has become almost a swear word. The idea is that the current elites do not need to be changed. As a result, the establishment now presents almost every vote as a battle for democracy. The implication is that democracy is the victory of the forces that maintain the correct continuity. In other words, the unipolar order. Accordingly, those who want to change course are declared enemies of democracy, even if they have a majority on their side." That was a statement by Fodor Lukyanov, who's the research director of the Valdai Club. A very precise, clear statement of the situation in the world today. Now, here's another shorter one, more punchy, from Sergei Karagonov, who's a leading Russian figure. And a provocateur, I might add. He said, "Western Europe is not only abandoning Russian culture, it's abandoning its own culture. It's canceling a culture which is largely based on love and Christian values. They are now sliding towards an inevitable march toward fascism." That's the view from Russia, but it's also similar to what's being expressed by figures throughout the global South. Now, as a result of this march toward fascism, they're moving in a different direction, toward economic cooperation, development corridors, and necessarily a break from the dollar, a de-dollarization, which is defensive. It's protection against the effects of sanctions, against the use of the weaponization of the dollar against their countries. As an example of this, the US and the UK are planning to steal the $300 billion that's been frozen in Russian reserve assets, to steal it, violating all international law, banking law and financial law, to give it to Ukraine because the populations in their countries don't want any more spending on this proxy war. Now, to give you a sense of how far gone the West is, let me tell you what Blinken said about this, the ethically and intellectually challenged Secretary of State of the United States. In a speech, or in a discussion rather, with Cameron, the British Foreign Secretary, on December 7th, he said 90% of the investments in Ukrainian defense is staying in the United States, going to arms manufacturers. He said, "This produces more American jobs, more growth in our own economy, and therefore this has been a win-win policy which needs to continue." It's not a win-win policy. It's a unipolar order description of what they're demanding, that their nations accept the idea of permanent warfare for the benefit of a small group of speculators. If you look at it from this standpoint, you realize it's a military, financial, industrial complex controlling governments to funnel money and to fill the pockets of speculators and investors in the military-industrial complex. And that's what Blinken represents, and that's what these wars represent. That's what the policy of the West has been reduced to, a neo-colonial imperial policy on behalf of speculators and swindlers. Now, what's the status of the two major wars? Well, the Ukraine proxy war is lost. With the exception of Zelensky and a handful of idiot generals like Hodges, the former NATO commander, David Petraeus, who keep cheerleading, the reality is that the Ukraine war is lost. It could have been resolved in March 2022, but was stopped. The agreement was broken by NATO. And as a result, there have been more losses of lives, more destruction, and an intent to continue this through the year. Even if the Congress says no, they're going to try and find a way to funnel more money. As I said, stealing the Russian assets represents one option. So the question is, do they double down or negotiate? That depends on what we do. Now, the Gaza war, it's expanding. It could expand to Lebanon. It could expand to Syria, as it already has, Iraq, and Iran. That's the intent. So the question is, will Israeli ethnic cleansing be allowed to continue, or will there be an international peace conference, as most nations at the United Nations have already called for? Interestingly, the Israeli press is starting to move away from Netanyahu. Ynet, which is the wire service of Yediot Ahronot, which is the leading daily circulation paper in Israel, had an op-ed on January 1st, Netanyahu can and should be replaced. There's a growing sentiment among the Israeli people that even though they wish to continue the war and win the war, quote unquote, they want to do it without Netanyahu because they know there's no potential for peace. And most of them are clear that it was Netanyahu's policies which provoked or allowed the October 7th attack to take place. Now, there's also, very interestingly, South Africa has brought a case before the International Court of Justice, not the International Criminal Court, which is controlled by NATO and the US, but the United Nations-based International Court of Justice, charging Israel with violating the 1948 Genocide Convention. The fact that it's South Africa that's doing this, a nation which had to overcome the legacy of apartheid, should not be lost on our Western viewers. You can be sure that people in the Global South are hoping this becomes a positive affirmation of justice and an end to colonial oppression. So the question is, will we in the West live in what Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is calling the post-Christian era? Or can we rediscover the morality and the commitment to justice and the commitment to the development of the creative potential of each individual as the way you increase the wealth of a society rather than looting and stealing? Will we do that? And we need your help for that. The LaRouche organization has been mobilizing through the last 40 years for a new economic order, not the economic order of Klaus Schwab and the global banksters, but one based on the principles of historic Christian policy, the Peace of Westphalia, that nations should act for the benefit of the other. And this is the policy that we see in China. This is the policy we see emerging as the dominant view of the BRICS countries and the Global South. So what can you do? You can sign up on our LaRouche organization site for updates. You can contribute to the LaRouche organization, share our videos, subscribe to our intelligence publication, the Executive Intelligence Review. This is the year we can win the 600-year battle against imperialism and colonialism. This is the fight against the City of London and Wall Street and the military financial complex. I ask you, on behalf of humanity, to join us in this battle. This is the year we can win. So thanks for joining me today, and I'll be with you tomorrow and the rest of the week.